So the now Arizona Cardinals, they've been around in the NFL for a very long time, one of the oldest franchises in the league, starting all the way back in the 1920s. And as such, they've had a long, extensive history, not necessarily in terms of winning a whole lot, but just in terms of, like, kind of being there. And because they've been there for so long, they've had a lot of different looks, a lot of different uniforms as the years go by. And that is something about me that I don't know if that's a detriment, like a huge character flaw of mine, but I am very, very interested in uniforms throughout the NFL, whether it be because they are stupid or whether or not because I think they're really, really cool. I've always just had a lot of respect and a lot of interest in NFL uniforms, how they look and how they've kind of evolved throughout the seasons. So I thought it would be fun to take a look at one of the oldest teams in the league and discuss their entire uniform history. This is going to be a very long video. Oh, also I'm going to be ranking all of the uniforms on a scale of 1 to 10. Why? Because it's my channel and I wanted to. Is this video going to get any views? Probably not. Let's get into the history. It all started for the Cardinals back in 1920 when they were still the Chicago Cardinals, and this was their first ever uniform. Very brown pants, very brown helmets, exactly how every other team looked, except they were like a reddish burgundy color, and they did have a lot of tannish stripes on the shoulders. 1921 came around and things significantly changed. There were less stripes on the shoulders than there were in the previous uniform. The helmet was less brown and more tan, and there was also a C added on the left shoulder, kind of down on the left sleeve, kind of a bit down on the arm, which was the official logo of the Chicago Cardinals, just the generic C. And then in 1922, the stripes on the socks mysteriously disappeared. I guess those stripes were important because as soon as they were added back in 1925, they immediately won the NFL championship. Other than that, the uniform was practically the same. 1926 came around and a massive redesign was in order. The red on the previous uniform was brightened up a little bit, officially dubbed the Vivid Burgundy. The helmet was more of a leather, just the generic brown at the beginning of the season, but as the year went on, they kind of decided to dye the leather, and the top half of it was like this silverish gray color, and the bottom half was red, the same red as the uniform. The pants were more tan and a little less brown this time around, and the shoulder stripes changed again, this time completely horizontal, with C in the middle of the two stripes on the sleeves now. 1927 would be the very first time that they would ever wear two uniforms in the same season. The first was identical to 1926 in pretty much every fashion. The other one, however, was a little bit different. There were no shoulder stripes this time around, and the red was changed from the vivid burgundy to a blood red color. They also had some markings on the front of their uniform, so no number anymore, but this time kind of more stripes up and down. They were kind of grayish black, very reminiscent to the Chicago Bears for the uniform they wore in the 1994 NFL season. And on this new uniform, there was also no stripes on the socks. This is important. As we all know, stripes are the key to championships. In 1929, they went back to a singular uniform, and again it changed design. They went back to the vivid burgundy of the old color, ditching the blood red, but this time having a white collar to break up all of the red, and kind of a white midriff section with white shoulder stripes kind of on the sleeves, more reminiscent of the 49ers. The helmet was all red, as were the socks, which were broken up by white stripes. Again, they kind of look more like the 49ers and the Cardinals to me here. In 1930, they changed the uniform design mid-season. That's not weird or anything. They started with a very similar looking uniform to their previous, except they changed it midway through to what I'm going to call the wing uniform. This one was weird. It is the same color, it's the same red, but the white on the collar was now gone, replaced with tan instead, and where the numbers were on the front, there is still numbers, but they're spaced apart quite a bit, and there is like tan circles around them that go off to the sides of them. Again, looks almost like fairy wings to me. Also, the numbers on the back of this uniform were white, where the numbers on the front were red. Don't quite know why. They continued to wear the wing uniform in 1931, and then also 2 games of 1932, that being Week 1 and Week 5 respectively. Speaking of 1932, they actually had 3 different uniforms this season. They had the wing uniform, but they also had one that was very similar to one that was worn before. This new uniform I'm going to call the shoulder uniform because it is a darker red. It's almost like a Merlot color. It's closer to the original red that they wore all the way back in their very first season. But the shoulder stripes, the sleeve stripes are gone. They've been replaced with shoulder pad stripes, kind of what the Cowboys used to have, and it's just plain white, which included the collar. They also had Merlot socks for this one as well. And because the NFL didn't believe in white uniforms back then, whenever a red team would play another red team, they always had the other team wear a different color, and they didn't have an official away, so usually the answer was just make them wear blue. I'm calling this one just the blue uniform. It's just a simple dark blue jersey with a white collar and then Merlot helmet and socks. I hate the Cardinals in blue. This is weird. In 1933 to 1934, they alternated between the shoulder uniform and the blue uniform. In 1933, they wore the blue uniform a total of 3 times, and they also wore the shoulder uniform 8 times. Whereas 34, they did the exact same split, except this time the blue uniform was worn in the season opener. 1935 introduced 2 new uniforms. One of them I'm going to be dubbing the black and blue jersey. It's the same dark blue as before, but this time they have a Steelers-esque shoulder stripe on the sleeve, where it's a very thin blue, and then a thick white, and then a thin blue again. They also changed the helmet color, this time going with more of a lipstick red, as well as the socks, which also had the same striping as the shoulder pads, except it was red and white instead of blue and white. The reason I'm calling it black and blue is because for some reason there's a thick vertical stripe right on the hamstring, goes right up to their ass. And then the other uniform they introduced in 1935, I'm going to be dubbing the black ass uniform. It's basically the same as the blue, except it's lipstick red for the actual jersey, same striping and everything, had a white collar, and same black stripe on the butt for some reason. They wore the black ass uniform in 11 games, and they only wore this black and blue a singular time in their entire history. It was a Week 11 game versus the Washington Redskins, where the Cardinals won 6-0. So, good job, Cardinals. And then for 1936, they pretty much changed their design again. Very reminiscent to the previous season, except this time the black ass stripe has been replaced with a red stripe. I don't know why. There were also a couple of players throughout the season that wore a different helmet for some reason. Most of their helmets were red with 2 white stripes kind of crisscrossing over the top. But there were a couple of players that wore the helmet that had 2 white stripes on it that went kind of the opposite direction. Not quite sure who wore what or why, but that is what this website says, so that's what I'm going with. It was also the first introduction of silver pants. They did it. They did the silver thing. This blue uniform was also only worn once, a Week 8 game versus the Redskins again, this time a 10-13 loss. 1937 introduced a new uniform, which I'm going to be dubbing the Shiraz uniform. This one is very important because it's basically exactly their uniform until, like, the 90s, so pay attention. The Shiraz red was a little bit darker than the lipstick red, but still lighter than the burgundy. It was also the first time that they ever wore white helmets. They paired these white helmets with white pants, and neither the top nor the bottom had any striping, nor the socks. Very basic uniform. And then in 1938, they carried over the Shiraz uniform, but added a new blue one. This one I'm going to be dubbing the Boring Blue. It is the same dark jersey as before. They went back to the darker blue. It still has the white helmet and the white pants from the other, from the Shiraz uniform. The reason I'm calling it boring is because, again, there are no stripes anywhere on this uniform. And this boring blue was only worn once during the 38 season, and there was a Week 4 game versus the Brooklyn Dodgers. No, not the baseball team, the football team, and they lost 0-13. 1940 saw them wearing the Shiraz uniform, home uniform, for weeks 1 and 2, before switching in week 3 to a new uniform. This one I'm dubbing the bicycle helmet uniform. It's still the same shade of red as the previous uniform, except the difference is the helmet is not white, at least not entirely. It is half red, half white, kind of cuts in the middle of the uniform, but it does go a little, or in the middle of the helmet, but it does go a little bit up, kind of creates like a wide angle triangle. It looks like a bicycle helmet, and it was worn in weeks 3, 4, and 5. This one looks bad. And then the boring blue was worn twice in 1940, both against red teams, the Redskins and Dodgers, and they lost both games. The Cardinals are cursed in blue, probably because they shouldn't be wearing it. 1947 to 1941, they wore the same uniforms pretty much as they had before, with the Shiraz home uniform and the boring blue. And in 1947, they even capitalized on these hot uniforms, winning a championship versus the Eagles in their Shiraz home uniforms. In 1946, for the second preseason game they had that year, they actually wore an updated Shiraz uniform that disappeared in the regular season. It was the same color and same design, but the number font was a little bit different. It looked better, in my opinion. And in 1948, we finally have stripes. I'm calling this the new Shiraz uniform. It's the same as the old one, but the updated font from 1946, as well as 2 thin red stripes on the pants. This uniform came with both red and white helmets. The red helmet was worn in week 2, 3, 4, where the white helmet was worn 6 through 13. In 1948, they also wore the white helmet when they played the champion Eagles in a championship loss. Guess they should have worn red. And they also updated the boring blue to the, quote, less boring blue. This time around, it's pretty much the same as before, but with 2 thin red stripes on the pants. They only wore it once in a Week 5 game versus the Giants, but they did win that one 63-35. They finally found a blue uniform that got them a victory. In 1949, the less boring blue uniform disappeared, as only the Shiraz uniform was worn. In weeks 1 and 3, they wore the red helmet, where the rest of the season they decided to wear the white one. In 1950, the less boring blue uniform made its return in week 6 versus the Redskins, a 38-28 victory. And the red helmeted Shiraz uniform variant was worn in 2 games, that being in week 3 and week 5. In the preseason only, they wore a variant of the less boring blue uniform, where instead of white helmets, they had red. This is cursed. And then in 1951, no red helmet was worn at all except for the preseason. In 1952, we had a revolutionary technology known as plastic helmets that finally replaced the leather helmets. Otherwise, though, the actual uniforms were the same, where the less boring blue variant was worn with red, but only in the preseason. And then a miracle happened, or a tragedy, depending on how you view this terrifying blue Cardinals uniform. I'm calling it the uniform death. The blue uniform death, where from 1953 to 1955, the blue uniform officially met its demise, as it was only worn in the preseason. 53 and 55 had some red helmets, but 54 was white only. And in 1956, we finally had a white uniform. Yay! I'm gonna dub this one the basic away. It's just a white jersey with red Shiraz pants, maybe like a red wine. It's kind of hard to tell based on this image. It's the same socks as the home pants and a red helmet as well. In 1957, the new Shiraz uniform was worn with a red helmet, but only in the preseason. The rest of the season it was just white. And from 1958 to 1959, the red helmet officially met its demise. It was only worn in the preseason of 58 and not at all in 59, replaced with just a white variant. 1960 was a massive move for the now St. Louis Cardinals, as the basic away was worn in week 1 of the season versus the Rams, in which a game that they won 43-21. The Rams had horns on the helmets that game, and the Cardinals decided it looked cool, so they decided to copy it and finally put their bird logo on the side of their helmets. The rest of the season was the updated new Shiraz and the basic away unis, but with the logos attached. Otherwise, the uniform itself was pretty much the same. From 1961 to 1963, the updated Shiraz uniform was worn at all home games, and there was a new away uniform. I'm calling these ones the basic whites. It was the same as the basic away uniform, but with the red pants being replaced with white pants, though the red socks did stay intact, which is good, because otherwise it would just be a red or white bodysuit. We'll get back to that one later. 1964 saw a huge update for the away uniforms. This one I'm going to call the OG Cardinals road uniform. It is a white jersey, white helmet with the logo, numbers on the shoulders, and a sleeve stripe has been added. It being a thin red one, a thin white one and then a thick black, and then repeated on the other side, as well as stripes on the pants, which is basically the same as the stripes on the shoulders, except on the pants and vertical. I should mention that in the preseason of 1964, they did not implement the black stripes on the pants, and they had the same stripes as the one from the basic whites. They fixed that by the regular season. And then the changes kind of slowed down for a little bit, as 1964 to 1969, the updated Shiraz uniforms and the OG Cardinals road uniforms were worn for every single game. In 1965, they finally updated the Shiraz home uniform, that adding a black stripe on the pants, but remained stripeless on the jersey. And then in 1969, they had the NFL shield on the upper left shoulder sleeve, that marking the NFL's 50th anniversary. Every team in the NFL wore it that year. In 1970, a new uniform was thrown into the mix of the pre-established ones. The new uniform for the home I'm going to be calling the return uniform. It's the same basic design, that being the same pant stripes, no stripes on the jerseys, etc., but the actual color was changed from the Shiraz red that they've been rocking since like the 40s back to the vivid burgundy they wore all the way back in the 30s. But they still had Shiraz socks. That's confusing. Also, the numbers were white, but they added a black outline for a little bit more of a definition. That's the one good thing about this uniform. They also introduced a new road uniform in this season. I'm going to call this one the OG Cardinals Road Update. It's the same as the old one, but just with the black outlines on the numbers. The return uniform was actually worn more than the updated Shiraz this year. It was worn in weeks 1, 2, 4, 7, and 11, whereas the updated Shiraz was only worn in weeks 9 and 13. And you would think that the updated uniforms would be worn more as the year progresses, but it was actually the other way around. They kind of got phased out as the year went. The updated road uniform was worn in weeks 3, 5, and 6, but then the next time it was worn in week 8, it was missing the black outlined numbers, and it never returned. I'm guessing fans weren't happy? I don't know. In 1971, the updated Shiraz uniform was worn in weeks 12, 13, and 14, now having fire brick red socks, so a little bit darker. They've swapped the colors of the socks on these uniforms, and it's really pissing me off. And another new home uniform was added. This one I'm going to be calling the Return Updated. It was worn for the majority of the home games that season. It's the same as the updated, but the red was changed from the vivid burgundy to fire brick red. There's also no black outlines on the numbers. The updated Cardinals road uniform is basically the same as it was before, except this time with firebrick red socks and claret red for the numbers. It's a little bit darker of a red. In 1972, the updated Shiraz uniforms were worn at home, and the return uniform disappeared entirely. And in 1973, the Shiraz uniforms were worn in every home game. Some games they had black numbered outlines, and sometimes they didn't. It seemed to be kind of random when they did and didn't, because it wasn't even in a discernible pattern. And a new uniform on the road was sometimes worn, but not all the time. I'm going to call it the updated ×2 uniform. This one was the same, but they updated the red on the numbers again from firebrick red back to like a Shiraz red. Week 9 marked the switch. In 74, the Shiraz uniform was worn for every home game, but the black outline numbers was only worn in the preseason. By the time it got to the regular season, they disappeared again. And the updated ×2 road uniform was very short-lived, as it was replaced in the preseason with a new road uniform. This one I'm going to be dubbing the Ugly R, because my god, what the fuck is this? It's like the same as the updated ×2, but the red went back to claret red with a black outline, so now the whole thing looks black, but the shoulder numbers are still Shiraz red. This is a dumpster fire. Unfortunately, we were stuck with it though, as from 74 to 78, they only wore these uniforms. Except in the preseason, where sometimes the updated ×2 uniform was worn, but it never appeared in the regular season. In 1974, they made the playoffs in the divisional round versus the Vikings, and they wore the ugly road uniform, and they got demolished 14-30. And they decided to double down on it the next year as they made the playoffs again, this time a divisional round matchup versus the Rams, and again wore the ugly R's, and this time lost 35-23. Stop wearing this cursed uniform. In 1976, they added a patch in the preseason for their Suwa, Japan, St. Louis sister city. That's kind of cool. And in 1979, a new-ish uniform was created, I guess. I'm going to call it the red wine uniform. It's the same as the Shiraz, but all of the red was replaced with the red wine, which is a little bit darker. Sure, I guess. And they finally got rid of the cursed ugly R's after the 75 playoff loss, where in 79, it's basically the same design, except they went back and changed all of the red on the uniform to red wine, so now everything matches and makes sense, thank God. There was also a very thick black armband on the sleeves throughout all of 1979 as a memorial to former tight end J.V. Kane. 1980 and 1981 were the same as 79, but with no armband. And then from 1982 to 1988, the same home uniform was worn, the red wine uniform, for every single season, but a new road uniform was introduced. This time I'm going to be dubbing it the St. Louis Road. It's pretty much the same as the red wine uniform, but this time the Cardinals logo is above the sleeve stripes. Looks pretty dope. In 1982, the Cardinals returned to the playoffs wearing the St. Louis Road uniform, but got absolutely smacked 41-16 by the Packers. In 1984, there was a patch added to the uniform in the regular season for their 25th anniversary in St. Louis. And then in 1988, they promptly moved away from St. Louis and moved to Phoenix. They played with the same St. Louis uniforms in 1988, but in 1989, they updated the away uniform. This one I'm going to be dubbing the Phoenix Road. It's pretty much the same as the St. Louis Road, except the Arizona state flag has replaced the stripes on the sleeves, so it's just the flag and then the cardinal. Kind of cool, I guess. And then in 1990, the Phoenix Road uniform, after just one season, was retired in the preseason, as by the time the regular season rolled around, they had a new away uniform. Again, this one I'm going to be dubbing the Phoenix Away new uniform. It is a white jersey, red wine numbers with a black outline on the top. The Arizona state flag was still on it, but this time it was Shiraz red pants instead of white, and black, red, black socks. Also, this meant that the home uniform was red wine, but the away pants were Shiraz. Pick a damn red, please. From 1990 to 1995, things stayed more or less the same. Starting in 1992, the uniforms were made by Russell, and they switched from the red wine back to Shiraz for the home uniform, thank God. And in 1994, they had the NFL 75th anniversary patch on it, as every team did. They also had two throwback uniforms, as again, most teams did. The throwback home uniform was a Shiraz Res jersey with almond tan pants, no logo on the white helmet, just a plain white. The Chicago Sea uniform was very, very, very small, but it was still there. It was in between two thin white stripes on the shoulders. And then for some reason, on the fronts of the home uniforms, they decided to take the numbers, shrink it, and then shove it in the top right of the chest. Cool. And the Red Sox had several white stripes on it, kind of similar to the one that I said looked like the Niners. Why did they choose these ones to redo? And they also added an away variant of this uniform. It's pretty much the same, except with a white jersey, no logo on the white helmets, and the Chicago logo was on the sleeves again, this time in between two red stripes. And in 1996, they added a new home uniform. This one I'm going to be calling the Base Red. It was a Shiraz red jersey with white pants, 0 stripes on the socks or on the jersey, but they did have stripes on the pants, but the black stripes were gone, replaced with two thin red stripes kind of spaced apart. And they had a new away uniform, which is honestly one of my favorite aways I think they've ever had. I'm calling this one the Phoenix Away Update. This one was a white jersey with Shiraz Res pants. The Arizona flag was still there, but it was a little bit smaller, leaving room for some shoulder stripes. This time they added blue into their color scheme, and I think it looks really, really nice. A thin blue, and then a thicker red, and then a thin blue for the stripes, and it was repeated on both the sleeve and the socks. Also, the stripes on the pants didn't have any blue. They were the same as the home uniform, but instead of it being red stripes, they were white. And from 96 to 01, the base red and the Phoenix Away update was worn for every single game. In 1997, Wilson decided to supply the uniforms instead of Russell. And in 1998, the Logo Athletic took over for Wilson. They just could not have a company the same for 2 years in a row. Also in 1998 marked their return to the playoffs, where in the wild card they wore their base red and win versus Dallas. Yeah, the 90s Cowboys were taken down by the Cardinals in Dallas, and they wore red. What the fuck happened in this game? And then in the divisional, they decided to wear their whites, which is apparently a massive mistake for Cardinals playoff ambitions, as every single time they've worn white, it feels like they lose in the playoffs. This time against the Vikings, they wore the Phoenix away updated uniform and lost 41-21. 1998, they also had the 100th anniversary patch on their uniform for the franchise. And then in 2001, they lost Logo Athletic, and Reebok decided to supply the uniforms, which is important because they will eventually get their own rebrand, but not yet. In 2002, the base red uniform was still worn, but they also wore a variant that had red pants. This is Reebok for you. And then the Phoenix away updated uniform was worn 6 times throughout the season, that being week 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 11, and 13. But then, for the last 2 games of the season, they wore what I'm calling remix uniforms. In week 15 versus the Rams, they wore a Phoenix away updated remix. This one I'm calling Remix 1. It's pretty much the same as the other one, except they decided to ditch the red pants and had white pants. And they also ditched the stripes on the socks. It was just solid red. And then in week 15, they wore another remix. This one I'm calling Remix 2. It's the same as the updated, but with white pants. This time they kept the stripes on the socks. It was white socks, but with striping. They lost in both of these, so they're both terrible. And then sadly, in 2003, the Phoenix away updated uniform was finally put to bed in the preseason, although it was worn in all 4 games. Remix 1 was worn twice, both in week 11 and week 16, but for the beginning part of the season, a new one was introduced, Remix 3. It was the same as updated, but with solid red socks and red pants. The home remix was also worn in week 17. It was base red, but with red pants and 2 thin white stripes. This one was the game against the Vikings. And you know the clip. Everyone play the clip.
Get back, guys. Here it is. The season's on the line. 2 receivers left and right. McCown takes the snap. He steps up. He's all by himself. Fires into the end zone. Caught! Touchdown! No! No! The Cardinals have knocked the Vikings out of the playoffs!
In 2004, they had just a huge barrage of different uniforms. The base red was worn just twice, week 14 and 15. The home remix, the one that was all red, was worn more times, 4 in total, weeks 9, 10, 12, and 17. The away remix 1 was worn 3 times, and then the away remix 3 was worn a total of 7 times. In 2005, the old set was retired, and Reebok finally got to redesign them in their entirety, and these are the classic 2000s uniforms that everyone remembers. The home ones I'm going to be calling the Reebok Home. It was a red jersey with small white patches under the arms, similar to the Falcons of the same era. They also had a thin black stripe that connected the shoulders and sleeves for some reason. They had Denver-style stripes on the pants, that being a red stripe with solid red socks. They also had the Reebok away uniform, which was a white jersey with the same stripes as the home, but flipped, with solid red socks as well, and white pants. They did wear a remix of this in the preseason where they had red pants, but they didn't wear that in the regular season. And in week 4, they added a International Series patch in a game versus the 49ers. That's cool. From 2006 to 2009, the Reebok rebrand was worn for every single game. The remixes apply here. I'm not going to be going through every single one because there's a lot of them, but the remixes include the home jersey, the red jersey with red pants, white jersey with red pants, and white jersey with white pants. In 2006, they introduced a new patch for the new stadium that they opened up in that was worn with both the white uniforms and the red ones, the white only in the preseason, the red ones in the regular season. And then in 2008, in week 1, they included a Gene Upsaw memorial patch. It was also their Super Bowl run season, which was a miracle season. It's a miracle season in more than one way. 1, they made the Super Bowl, and 2, they finally broke their damn streak of wearing white and losing in the playoffs. They mostly wore their home uniform with white pants throughout these playoffs in both the Wildcard Championship and Super Bowl, but the divisional round they decided to wear white and they won. Thank God. And then from 2010 to 2016, the Reebok uniforms were worn for every game, but they introduced a new variant, this being the Reebok Black. It was the same as the home, but with a black jersey, black stripes on the pants, and black socks. It was pretty much worn in 2 games for the first couple seasons. The very first appearance was against Tampa Bay in a 35-38 loss. It was worn twice in 10, twice in 11, twice in 12, twice in 13, but then the last couple years in 14, 15, and 16, it was only worn once, weeks 3, 4, and 4. Almost every single season this uniform was worn, it was worn in weeks 3 or 4. In 2011, they had a 9/11 tribute patch on the Reebok home uniform. And then in 2012, they switched from Reebok to Nike, but Nike didn't redesign the Cardinals, at least not yet. They also wore a Hall of Fame 50th anniversary patch for weeks 14 and 15 on the home and away, respectively. In 2014, they made the playoffs again, this time wearing the Reebok home uniforms with red pants and red socks, but they lost 16-27. And then in 2015, they made the playoffs again, this time wearing the Reebok home with white pants, and they won versus the Packers in the divisional. But then in the championship, they wore the same uniform but lost to the Panthers. From 2017 to 2022, they wore pretty much all the same uniforms, except a new one was introduced, this being the Color Rush black uniform. It was the same as the other black uniform they had, but with red jersey stripes and red numbers instead of white. Black pants with red stripes, and black socks. It was almost exclusively worn on Thursday Night Football. In 2017, it was worn in Week 10 versus Seattle, its very first time ever on Thursday Night Football, where they earned a loss. Week 18, it was Thursday Night Football versus Denver, where they again lost, this time by a much wider margin. In 2019, they wore it in Week 9 versus San Francisco in a Thursday night game, again a loss, this one a little bit closer. And in 2020, it was worn twice in weeks 11 and 13. In 13, it was the first non-Thursday Night Football game that they ever wore it in. Again, another loss. In 2021, it was worn on the Packers versus Thursday Night Football. That was the one where AJ Green forgot where the ball was. In 2022, they wore it in Week 7 versus New Orleans in a Thursday Night Football game. This one was the one where that epic diving interception return for a touchdown happened in. This was actually the first win in this uniform, and it was in 2022. It was introduced in 2017. In 21, they also made the playoffs, and for a wildcard game versus the Rams, they wore their Reebok away, and like the curse says, you wear white, you lose in the playoffs, as they got clobbered by the Rams. Which leads us to today, where Nike finally got a shot at redesigning them themselves. These ones I'm calling the Nike Home, Nike Away, and Nike Black uniforms, respectively. These ones suck. This is the bodysuit I was talking about. It's literally just red jersey. It's not even the same red. It's a red brown now. They changed it. It's a little bit darker. Red jersey, red pants. Noticeably bigger numbers on the back for some reason, and a very large Arizona watermark on the home uniform. There's no stripes anywhere. This one I'm also dubbing the red morph suit because fuck this uniform. They also have the Nike Away, which is a little better, I guess. It's a white jersey, white pants, but there is some striping, a thin red and then a thick silver that has Cardinals written on it with the jersey, and then a thin red again, and then the stripes on the pants is the same, except there's no Cardinals written on it. And then the Nike Blacks are very similar to the Color Rush Black. It's a black jersey, black pants, red numbers. The only difference is these ones do have red and silver stripes. And that is every Cardinals uniform they have ever worn. And yes, I realized I didn't rank them. No, I'm not going to. This video took forever, and I'm really just want to get it out there. Okay, bye!